Hey everyone. So those political elites have been busy little bees lately, and I was initially going to make this video on the migrant caravan exclusively, but so many things have happened in such a short span of time which need to be covered that I've had to go over a theme rather than a specific subject. Right now, the state really desperately wants you to be scared into the political system and has been manufacturing political outrage with a series of recent events designed to cause hysteria and make people feel dependent on the political system. The first of which was the Brett Kavanaugh controversy, but now there's a migrant caravan of 3,500 people coming from Central America towards the US border with the stated intention of migrating illegally into the US.
Let's see. Attacking the presumption of innocence didn't scare people enough. I know. Let's send a literal fucking army of illegal immigrants towards the border and storm it like the fucking White Walkers from Game of Thrones. That should get some more turnout.
The media has been desperately trying to pretend that the caravan was not a politically organized operation, but basic research into it shows that it's funded by a group known as Pueblo Les Fronteras, which is a front group for EndLawn, a political interest group which lobbies for greater state control of industry, which is a member of the AFL-CIO, the successor of the New Deal Coalition, an open Democrat Party interest group which explicitly states that its main goals are to increase voter turnout, and this narrative is really just an insult to our intelligence given that there are rest areas reserved for 3,500 people in the caravan all across Central America and Mexico, tents for 3,500 of those people, and supplies to feed those 3,500 people. Simple math can dictate to you that organizing this would cost an exorbitant amount of money, which a grassroots organization with no political connection simply would not be able to pull together, especially out of the blue like this. The fact alone that it would cost $275 million to fund this stunt should show everyone that this was funded by large political interests for a purpose which was very clearly important to them. This is not only a unmistakably politically funded operation, but one which is explicitly funded by the Democratic Party. Now, the Republicans have been able to use this to scare voters and argue that this is an attempt on the part of the Democrat Party and their interest groups to influence the midterm election in the United States. However, it's awfully strange that for a secret conspiratorial plot, Democrat politicians seem to be awfully eager to come forward and outright state that what they're being accused of is their actual intentions, while at the same time denying this to anyone who questions them and calling anyone who questions them conspiracy theorists. Also, let's not forget that $275 million were spent on getting only 3,500 people into the United States, assuming that even half of these people actually do make it into the US, which seems less likely by the day given that the military has been deployed to guard the US-Mexico border. You would need to go out on a limb and you would have to assume that all of them are actually going to be interested in not only voting, but voting for Democrat politicians. So realistically, only a sliver of the people in the caravan are actually going to make it into the US, and an even smaller fraction of that sliver are going to vote in the midterm election. In other words, if it were the case that the Democrats were funding this caravan with the intention of manipulating the election, they just blew $275 million on signing maybe 100 people up to vote. And to put this into perspective, that's more money than Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Ben Carson raised for their 2016 presidential campaigns combined. So with all of these glaring inconsistencies and just downright impractical logistic failures, despite the narrative around it being that this was some well-thought-out deep state conspiracy, it's glaringly obvious that the intention of organizing the caravan of migrants was not to increase voter turnout for the Democrat Party. So if it's the case that this operation isn't just being funded to benefit the Democrat Party, then why are Democrat Party interest groups sinking such an absurdly large amount of of money into it. So I've been expanding upon this concept quite a bit lately, but if you haven't seen any of my other videos, particularly the one covering the Kavanaugh controversy, all political parties are exactly the same, because as state-operated entities, they all have the same interests. They all push laws which, despite being proposed for different ideological purposes, produce the exact same end result, my favorite example being how Republicans advocate for tariffs and Democrats advocate for increasing taxes. Both produce the same results for the market despite being advocated for from a different premise. And all the migrant caravan has done is give the GOP another opportunity to make themselves look more reasonable in comparison and convince more people that they need to vote for them because the Democrats are deliberately making themselves look so crazy. As noted earlier, a large chunk of the population in the US are growing increasingly disenfranchised with the political system, whether for ideological reasons or they're simply not interested in voting. In the 2016 election, only around half of the population that could have voted did, and that was in one of the most heated of manufactured political climates. This is a big problem for the state for three main reasons. One, it completely shatters the illusion that you're being represented by an electoral government through the propaganda that you're taught in government schools. Therefore, even the praxis of the social contract argument fails, though it's pretty easy to see that the social contract argument is false on this idea, since the mere premise of having someone that holds dominion over you and them being subject to your dominion at the same time is a performative contradiction, among the other problems with the social contract, the main one being that I never actually gave consent, neither did any of you. 2. The blatant destruction of language through manufactured tribalism. More specifically, the party system and the left-right dichotomy are designed to destroy philosophical concepts and replace them with more simplistic and reductionist terms which simultaneously have increasingly vague definitions. For example, referring to all market-based ideologies or systems as capitalist, while defining capitalism as the profit incentive, with the end goal to literally render people incapable of discussing ideas because every political concept in mainstream discourse effectively has a different interpretation to each person. Further proof of this is that despite the increasingly arbitrary nature of political debate and mainstream ideas, one idea among them all is consistent and never changing, and that idea is that the party system and the state are what society should be centered around. And this leads me to my third point. The main goal of parties and the left-right political spectrum in general is to make people feel dependent on the state, as to dissuade them from seeking alternatives or creating ways to undermine the state because they're so utterly afraid of the opposing party acting so crazy and being portrayed as being so crazy that they feel as if their survival literally depends on the controlled opposition group being elected and creating laws which defy the other party. That is what I believe the motivation behind the Democrats funding the migrant caravan was. The purpose was not to get illegals voting for the Democrats, it was to convince people that the Democrat Party is a threat to their society and that voting for GOP politicians is the only way to stop them. The goal of the caravan was not to get more votes for the Democrats, it was to scare more people into the political system, which, since this is literally the sole purpose of both the Republican and Democrat parties, the Democrat Party would indeed spend $275 million on this if that were the intention. So now that we've covered the migrant caravan, let's get on to the elephant in the room, you know, the more recent stuff.
Breaking news this morning, and we fear it will not end anytime soon.
Not end anytime soon.
Yesterday, it was a surreal moment here for us at CNN. Our colleagues Poppy Harlow and Jim Sciutto were on the air. They were reporting about the bombs that were sent to the Clintons and the Obamas when this moment happened.
To have projectiles, I mean, excuse me, that sounds like a fire alarm here. We'll keep you posted on that, but to have projectiles.
Okay, we're going to jump in. There's a fire alarm here.
You might have heard it in the background. We're going to find out what the latest is
we'll be right back.
at CNN. We're going to be right back.
So let's see, we can start with the synagogue shooting, where the media still can't seem to get crucial details regarding what happened down, such as how many people died, how many were wounded, the description of the shooter, multiple outlets claiming that he has a beard when the shooter clearly did not have a beard. The shooter's account on Gab was taken down, the media claims he was a Trump supporter, then an archive of his account is uncovered, and it turns out that he was a National Socialist who believes in the Zog conspiracy and opposes the Republican Party on the grounds that they're globalists. And in January of 2018, there was an active shooter drill in the exact same synagogue the shooting actually happened at, which is something that the military and police agencies do to give themselves plausible deniability when they're plotting an operation which they don't want the public to be aware of in the case that their plot were to be uncovered before it can come to fruition. A great example being when the FBI in February of this year were exposed arming and grooming a paranoid schizophrenic man with bombs in Oklahoma City, which when exposed, the FBI claimed that the bombs weren't real and tried to distance themselves by arguing that it was part of a drill. A lot of weird shit surrounding the coverage of the Pittsburgh shooting, mainly that the mainstream media seems to be incredibly eager to point out all of these strange inconsistencies, and keep in mind that since the media is state-funded through subsidies, and we know that CIA agents write their stories as exposed in Operation Mockingbird's declassification, everything the media tells us is what the state wants us to know and wants us to think. So why are they pointing out inconsistencies in their own narratives? This would only make sense if they wanted us to think that this was a false flag operation. So based on all of the inconsistencies, I am relatively certain that the Pittsburgh shooting is some form of government psyop. However, I'm going to have to deviate slightly away from the narrative spreading around on the alternative media, because I'm not entirely convinced that the shooting was a false flag operation. If this were a false flag operation, you'd think the mainstream media absolutely would not be arguing that it was, since their interests are the interests of the state, and if the state covertly manufactured some event for political reasons, the last thing they would want people to know is that it was a false flag. I'm not saying that this isn't a false flag, but with the evidence, I'm a little torn here. On one hand, this could be reverse psychology designed to convince alternative media personalities that this isn't a false flag simply because the mainstream media is discussing it so openly when it really is, which would explain why only a handful of news outlets and pundits are discussing it so openly, such as RT or Fox, while the others are dismissing it as a conspiracy theory. On the other hand, this may not be a false flag incident, and the media is simply trying to convince people that it is to try and discredit alternative media personalities. I lean more towards the latter, since it would conform to the agenda as explained earlier of the migrant caravan, whereas the other explanation would not. If the alternative media was discredited and people couldn't trust it as a source of information, it would, in theory, bring more disenfranchised people back into the political system, because they would feel as if they could only trust politicians in the mainstream media, which is what the state wants, whereas in the other scenario, people would just be confused, and that would probably lead to more people being disenfranchised. But then again, there's the January 2018 shooting drill, but it's entirely possible that this could have legitimately just been a coincidence. I mean, no joke, this shooting was so predictable that I literally predicted this exact scenario was going to happen with 100% accuracy 2 days before, when Gab was still up. Speaking of which, the censorship of Gab by state-funded companies and the narrative of Gab being responsible for the Pittsburgh shooting also conform to the latter narrative nicely, which, by the way, I'm going to be on My 2 Cents' channel later today, and I, along with a few others, are going to be discussing this and refuting the ridiculous call for regulations from the skeptic cucks. Now, on to the pipe bomb narrative. I mean, there's not really much to say here. It's been confirmed by forensic examination that these bombs were fakes, that the suspect is a Democratic Party insider who supposedly hand-delivered them. Then when it came out that the stamps weren't canceled, suddenly he mailed them from Florida while also hand-delivering the package to CNN in New York. The clock on the bomb still has the time sticker left on it, and literally literally doesn't even have an alarm, which means that this bomb couldn't have gone off even if it were armed. There is also a clear ISIS flag attached to the supposed pipe bomb, which is awfully strange given that this man was supposedly a rabid Trump supporter, and as shown earlier, despite the pipe bomb being completely inert, CNN still had an evacuation, which, by the way, never once in CNN's entire history, other than this one time, has there ever been a fire alarm that interrupted a live broadcast. So this is obvious self-aggrandizing political theater, and since CNN was in on the narrative before it had even broke the news, that alone proves that this is a coordinated false flag operation and isn't just some confusing psyop. But regardless, all of these events share one common theme. They are designed to make people feel as if they need to be brought into the political system, whether it's stoking anxiety of election fraud to try and trigger psychological reactants, making people feel as if society is becoming more dangerous due to polarization and therefore that political partisanship under the current system is how to achieve stability, or by simply giving the average American a boogeyman to be afraid of before the upcoming election. This is all manufactured and sold to you for a nefarious agenda. Anyway, that's all for today's video. If you like it, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.